Hey, DawgNation, happy Monday to you. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Good to have you with us on what weirdly is a pretty packed and loaded show for us today, despite the fact that Georgia did not play this past Saturday. A lot of the events of college football the last couple of days seem relevant for the Dogs. We'll explain why, and we will begin our look ahead to the return of Georgia on the football field this upcoming Saturday against the Kentucky Wildcats. Good to welcome John Stinchcomb into the program today, and glad to have you with us here too. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Our look ahead to the Georgia Bulldogs' return to the field against Kentucky on Saturday begins, at least briefly, with a look back on what happened 2 Saturdays ago against the Alabama Crimson Tide. And yes, I know, at this point in time, you're kind of tired of that game. You don't really want to talk about that anymore. I totally get that. I would not be doing it unless we had really good reason to do so. And the really good reason we have to do so here today is, I think, an uncharacteristically blunt assessment of the current state of college football from Alabama coach Nick Saban. And Saban cites the game that Georgia just played against Alabama 2 weeks ago as evidence to back up his point. I think for most Georgia fans, what Saban's about to say, and I'm going to read the quote to you here in a moment, what Saban's about to say is undeniably true. I do think it remains to be seen how much folks inside the Butts-Mehre Heritage Hall at the Georgia football operations, I think it remains to be seen how much they believe this is undeniably true, but Saban's words here carry a lot of weight. He was interviewed by Chris Lowe from ESPN.com on Friday, and Saban had this to say about the current state of the sport in which we all love. Let me read this to you, Nick Saban. He says, "It used to be that good defense beats good offense." He says, this is Nick Saban, "Good defense doesn't beat good offense anymore. It's just like last week. Georgia listen to this. This is very interesting from Nick Saban. He says Georgia has as good a defense as we do an offense, and yet we scored 41 points on them. That's not the way it used to be." Nick Saban goes on to tell Chris Lowe from ESPN, "It used to be if you had a good defense, other people weren't going to score. You were always going to be in the game." Nick Saban says, "I'm telling you, it ain't that way anymore. I don't like it, but we just have to make sure we have an offense that's that way and that's explosive," which we have. That is Nick Saban via ESPN and the writer Chris Lowe, who conducted an interview with him on Friday. That is as cut and dry as I think you're going to get from Nick Saban in terms of the current state of college football. That good offense now beats good defense. He throws Georgia quite a compliment to say that the Georgia defense is every bit as good a unit as our offense is, but in a game like that, our offense is just going to be favored. They're going to score the 41 points because that's the current state of college football. And even for a defensive-minded coach like Nick Saban, there's no sense in fighting against that. There's no sense in denying that it's true. It's simply about building as good an offense as you possibly can, which means you make the best hires you can make, you recruit the most prolific offensive talent you can find, and you try to build as explosive an offense as you possibly can. And if you don't have that, no matter how good your defense is, you are not going to win a national championship. Now, we don't know that Kirby Smart would ever speak as bluntly about this topic as Nick Saban has, even though Smart kind of comes from the Nick Saban coaching tree. When it comes to being that articulate on this subject, I don't quite remember Smart coming out and saying it as boldly as Nick Saban says it there. But we should presume that Smart at least partially believes this because of some of the recent moves that the Georgia program has made. And I think with full confidence we can say that Georgia fans believe this. Georgia fans, and on the basis of the conversation we've had since Georgia's lost to Alabama, it's all been about how do you upgrade the offense? Is it currently a quarterback change this year that could get that done? Is it playing some of the players who aren't playing as much that could get that done? How do you get an offense as dynamic as the one that Alabama has and other teams have kind of put on display in college football so far here in this 2020 season? And obviously that conversation is going to be ongoing. And, if you're a Georgia fan, what can be frustrating about this is it sort of seems like the only thing that you can do is be patient while what you assume is going to be an eventual transformation while it occurs. Because, listen, If you want to go back and watch Georgia back in 2019, Georgia was a long way from being explosive at all. Not really doing it with explosive runs or explosive passing plays. And when you are as far away from the ultimate goal, being explosive on offense as Georgia was a season ago, the idea that the transformation is going to be instantaneous and it's simply about putting the right players in the game, and all of a sudden you get an offense that explodes the way the Crimson Tide's offense does, that's probably a degree of wishful thinking that just doesn't make a lot of sense. That a transformation to be as explosive as the best teams in college football have been. And by the way, for everybody who kind of acted like the LSU offense a year ago was this kind of once-in-a-millennium phenomenon, the truth is, for the most part, what Alabama has done, what Mac Jones has done at quarterback, it has really been pretty similar to what Joe Burrow and LSU did a year ago, and Georgia getting there is going to be just a little bit of a slow transformation if it even happens at all. But the hiring of Todd Monken would seem to be a nod in that direction. The way in which Georgia recruited wide receivers for the class of 2020 would seem to be a nod in that direction, that Georgia is eager to make the change and will just have to see how quickly all that takes place. But there was a reminder this weekend that patience in regard to this, getting as good as you can get now in the hopes that you get way better eventually, there is a chance in which that patience might be rewarded. There was an unfortunate set of circumstances that happened to Alabama here this past weekend. Jaylen Waddle, the outstanding Alabama wide receiver, hurt his ankle, and he is now expected to miss the entirety of the rest of the season. Obviously, we would never celebrate the fact that this happened. We love watching Jaylen Waddle on this show, and we never wish an injury on anyone. But while we would not wish this into existence, the fact of this now does exist, and the opportunity for Georgia to take advantage of this situation is now a little bit more significant. Here is Nick Saban at halftime after the Waddle injury from CBS.
Told about the severity of Jaylen Waddle's injury.
He's out. He's out. He's out for the year. And it's a shame because the guy's a great player. It's exciting for college football to see a guy play like that. I hate it that he gets hurt on a play like that. Not supposed to bring a ball out when you're that deep in the end zone, but he's a great player, so you got to let him use his judgment.
Quick aside here for a moment. Nick Saban never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity when it comes to showing a little class and being a good guy. To my ears, and I think to the ears of many other people there as well, it sort of seems like that Saban was blaming Waddle for the injury that took place. I guess if Scott Cochran's not there anymore, he can't blame Cochran for injury, so now you blame the player himself for getting hurt. That's a very weird comment and statement from Nick Saban at the halftime of this game here. And listen, I'm going to chalk this up to Saban just being frustrated in the moment, not choosing his words carefully, but those are undoubtedly poorly chosen words when it comes to Nick Saban. But as I said before, while we would never wish the Waddle injury into existence, the fact that it did happen is a fact that now must be reckoned with, and I think it creates an additional opportunity for Georgia here this season, even in a year in which the Georgia offense has been nowhere near explosive as the Alabama offense has been this season. The Waddle injury is just going to matter for the Crimson Tide. Now, it didn't matter on Saturday against Tennessee because Tennessee's not very good. But in a possible rematch of Georgia and Alabama, has the gap between these two teams now gotten a little slimmer because of that? I think there's a little bit of evidence to suggest that it might. Let me go back to after the Alabama game 2 weeks ago, because Waddle's value in this game and to Alabama overall is not in just what he does. It's also in what he opens up for other receivers. Listen to Kirby Smart here in particular saying that the fear of what the speedy Jaylen Waddle is doing opened up an opportunity for Devontae Smith to have an explosive play in that game 2 Saturdays ago. Here's a short clip from Kirby Smart.
They ran a bubble wheel where they throw the bubble out there, and they've got Waddle as the bubble guy, and everybody's worried about him, and Devontae slipped by our star and caught a touchdown.
So the point here is the fear of worrying about Jaylen Waddle leads to a Devontae Smith touchdown, which would lead you to say that Waddle's loss for Alabama is not just his own statistics disappearing, it's potentially every other part of this Alabama offense now made a little bit less because Jaylen Waddle's injured and not playing. So I've kind of thrown a lot of information at you here over the course of the last few minutes. Let me see if I can kind of sum all of this up somewhat succinctly. I think that Nick Saban is probably right when he says that this has now become a sport about great offense, and a great offense is just going to get the best of a great defense. We saw that 2 weeks ago when Georgia played Alabama. And for now, the Georgia offense is still very much a work in progress. seemingly a long way away from being as explosive as the best teams in college football. However, Georgia fans might still do well by themselves to be a little patient with this process as the transformation of the Georgia program is ongoing. Suddenly, Alabama in a potential rematch in December might not be as explosive as it was because of the Jaylen Waddle injury. And there's only so much offensive improvement Georgia's going to be able to undertake in the midst of just one season. But all of a sudden, the feeling around a potential Georgia-Alabama rematch maybe feels a little different. For Georgia, it seems the job, when it gets back to football this Saturday, is to get as good as it can with the personnel it has available right now, and then let's let the chips fall where they may come December if Georgia can truly earn that rematch with Alabama. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and we are glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. A lot of ways to get in touch. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. We are available as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just really glad to have you a part of the program. We are busy on today's show. We'll have John Stinchcomb coming up a little bit later on. Just a fully loaded broadcast. We really appreciate our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia for making it all possible. You know, Pella Window and Door of Georgia is a great company for homeowners to know about because they can do something big and great for you. They can help equip your house with energy-efficient windows and doors. This is a great thing because it really can do two things for you. It can increase the curb appeal of your home, which could improve the resale value when you're going to put that home on the market, but it also can keep energy on the inside of your house. Whether it be air conditioning, which you were probably running a little bit this weekend because it was hot again, or when the cold weather comes in here pretty soon, you want to keep that heat inside your house there as well. And those energy-efficient windows and doors can help you do that and potentially save you money on your bills there as well. So it's great to think about our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Also nice to think about great savings here right now. Between now and November 12th, you can get 50% off qualifying installations or no payments, no interest for 12 months. Pella Window and Door of Georgia offers great warranties and unparalleled expertise as well. A couple different ways for you to get in touch. You can find them online at PellaBranch.com. That's PellaBranch.com. Or you can give them a call in their Dunwoody showroom at 404-445-2979. That's 404-445-2979. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. As I said before, we'll get John Stinchcomb here coming up in just a minute. Before that, let's go around the doghouse here today, assisted by AAA. And we started the show by saying that Nick Saban now says that this is undeniably an offensive sport, and it's explosive offenses that are going to get the best of great defenses. We think that's true. I think most Georgia fans think that's true. And there's a little bit of frustration about how far away it might seem that Georgia is from truly being as explosive as the best offenses in the country. But as Georgia gets ready to go back and play again this upcoming Saturday, I think it's probably appropriate for us here a little bit this week to spend some time thinking about how the Dogs can get better offensively right now. Not the miraculous transformation that might occur eventually, but the sporadic, maybe incremental, I guess the better word, incremental improvement that can take place here this season. And so over the course of the next few days, I want to look at a couple of key issues facing the Georgia offense and discuss how it can get better. You know, one of the things that I hear most commonly right now from Georgia fans about sort of specific micro issues related to the Georgia offense, one of the questions that comes up is, well, why isn't George Pickens getting the ball more? George Pickens was a guy that dominated the Sugar Bowl at the end of last season, had a great deal of hype leading up to the start of this season. But for the most part, the big explosive numbers just haven't been there for Pickens. He's had a good season. He still ranks among Georgia's better wide receivers, but maybe not as good a year as people expected him to have. Is there a way to get George Pickens the ball more is a question that commonly gets asked. So as we're around the doghouse here today, assisted by AAA, I'm going to go back in time a couple of weeks ago to when former Georgia quarterback David Green was here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And what we said at the time was, David, you played with a 1,000-yard receiver, Terrence Edwards. It stands to reason that you wanted to get Terrence the ball as much as you could, and Georgia succeeded in doing that this year, in that particular year, going back to 2002. How would you make the comparison then to you trying to get the ball to Edwards to Georgia now facing the same dilemma of how do you make sure you get as many touches for George Pickens as possible? And what Green, who was a great quarterback at Georgia, said on that topic, I think is quite relevant as we think about the season's second half. That's about to begin for the Dogs and for Pickens in particular. This is David Green on that subject.
Even even though Terrence had 1,000 yards back in '02, we never once called a play and said, we're throwing this to Terrence no matter what. At the end of the day, Coach calls play, and look, we may be trying to get the ball to Pickens, or, my day it was Terrence. He may have been number one read, but if the defense takes it away, you have to go elsewhere. There's just no way to jam it in there. There's too many other good players. So the best way to get George Pickens the ball is for other receivers to continue to step up and make plays. And when George Pickens has 10 catches and nobody else has any, that's a disaster long term, because when you play these better teams, they will be able to take that guy away, and you got to have other guys that have confidence that they can step up and make those big plays.
I think that David Green is right there. I think that one of the most significant issues facing Georgia offensively is getting George Pickens more involved in the second half. But I don't believe there's any kind of real shortcut that enables that to happen. I think the only way to get more statistics for Pickens is to kind of raise the entire level of the passing attack for Georgia. That is, the entirety of the passing attack increases. I think the numbers for Pickens increase there as well. Now, I've said before, I don't mind occasionally kind of forcing a throw in Pickens' direction, because I think he's that valuable as a weapon that you occasionally have to try to squeeze that ball into a tight window when Pickens is involved. You have to be willing to do that a little bit to take some risk. We've seen Stetson Bennett, who has been the Georgia quarterback, do that some already this year. But overall, to say that you start a play, designed to say, well, this ball's going to go to George Pickens no matter what, David Green, who knows the position as well as anyone could, said that's just not something you're really quite able to do. So there's no denying that Pickens needs to be more involved. I think the solution to how that happens, though, is not a simple, easy fix. It's the entirety of the passing game, the level that needs to be raised. And if that happens, then you'll be able to get George Pickens more involved there as well. We're around the doghouse. It's assisted today by our friends at AAA. And listen, one of the things that we love about AAA is their legendary roadside assistance, but they also save you money as well. And one of the ways they can do that is with the AAA Savings Hack Pack. It's a combination of benefits that's worth over $1,000, and it's available to every AAA member, including free career assistance, identity theft protection, 85% off prescriptions, discounts on food and essentials while you're traveling. It's good stuff. You can go to AAA.com/GoSavings and learn a lot more about that. That's AAA.com/GoSavings. All right, we are very busy on our edition of DawgNation Daily presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia today. You may not realize this, but the SEC season as we know it might be hanging in the balance right now. Now, the spoiler alert is it looks like things are going to work out okay, but maybe a little more in jeopardy than you might have realized here over the course of the last 48 hours or so. We'll tell you about that later on. But for now, on everything kind of in front of Georgia as it returns this Saturday against Kentucky, let's get ready to talk to John Stinchcomb right now as a part of a Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Welcome in, John Stinchcomb here, the great former Georgia Bulldog and a terrific analyst talking about the Dogs here on DawgNation right now. It's our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. And, John, if you don't mind, I want to kind of pick up here on where I started the show at the very beginning. Nick Saban really putting it out there on no uncertain terms that right now this is an offensive sport. He says the Georgia defense is every bit as good as our offense is, but in a matchup between two great units, offense is just favored right now. We've talked about this kind of stuff a lot before, but how much do you agree with Nick Saban's assessment there that when it comes to great offense, it is just going to beat great defense right now?
I think the way the game's set up right now, it definitely favors the offense. You look at the way some of these teams have configured certain plays and the way you can move, limitations you've placed on defensive back. It's all right. I mean, as a fan, it's exciting to see a game where points are lighting up the scoreboard as opposed to a 10-3 grinder. So I very much believe that Saban is onto something here. Now, with that said, the importance of a good defense, I still think it exists. I just don't think that the way the game is set up right now that you can reasonably expect to just shut down offenses like you could in years past.
I'm being told we have a little bit of a Facebook video issue today. I certainly apologize for that for the folks who are affected by that. Slide over and catch us on YouTube or Twitter, though. It sounds like those platforms are working just fine. And this is a Facebook issue, so we're kind of at the mercy of them on that. So maybe Mark Zuckerberg can get off his couch and see if he can get our video platform player taken care of. Let me follow up on this, John. This way, in that I think for a Georgia fan, you're left to wonder, okay, well, what do you do about that then? Because it's not entirely obvious to me that Kirby Smart necessarily views this exactly the same way as Saban does. I don't believe Smart's quite has been as blunt on that topic as Saban has been. There's certainly some evidence to suggest that Georgia's trying to change itself offensively. The hiring of Todd Monken is a step in that direction. I think that Georgia's recruited the skill position players pretty well here as of late. There have been lots of high-profile quarterback issues, which is probably one of the things that's been a little bit of an anchor on some of this progression thus far. But you're left to wonder, well, how much better can you get in a year like this, given where you were a year ago, seemingly struggling in this regard, and just giving some personnel limitations that you might have right now. I've suggested that patience is still warranted, that if you get as good as you can with what you've got right now, all of a sudden the SEC championship game seems more winnable than it may have, certainly before this Saturday because of the Jaylen Waddle injury. We're not glad that Waddle got hurt, but it is an opportunity now for Georgia to take advantage of. Football is a physical sport, and injuries are just a part of the game. So, even in the light of maybe Georgia not quite keeping pace with the most explosive offenses in the country, to me, it doesn't mean the season itself has to be doomed. What do you think about all of that?
I still think the arrow is up for this Georgia team, and it's specifically this offense. Every goal that you set at the beginning of the season but one, which is run the table, is still very much on the table for Georgia. You can still win your side of the SEC, compete in the SEC championship, win that, play for a national championship. All those goals that you set at the beginning of the year that you've been working for are still very much in front of you. So the opportunity exists. There's no reason to back up the tents and look to 2021 as the football season goes. There's still every opportunity for Georgia to have a historic year. Now, with that said, improvements have to take place. Offensively, I think what's great is we still haven't seen the best from this offense. There's still so much more to learn about them and the chemistry that they can create. I feel I have a totally different feel at this point in the season than I did in 2019, where you just felt like, golly, there's just not enough gears for them to power up. And this very much doesn't feel like the case. I always feel like watching these Georgia games that I'm encouraged. There's places in the run game that you get excited about. You look at some of these young running backs and really some of the veterans and say, man, there's a lot to be optimistic for. James Cook, who has shown moments in the past, you've seen a lot more of him this year. Deuce's ability to read the holes, and then Milton and McIntosh, man, each time they touch the ball, there's a certain electricity going. And with these receivers, we haven't seen Pickens become the George Pickens that we know he's capable of, but yet we've kind of answered that question of who are some of the complementary pieces, because Kieris Jackson has certainly had his moments this year, as did Burton in the contest against Alabama. Yeah. So once you're able to put these pieces together and threaten a defense for 60 total minutes and not just 40 against, arguably the best team in the country, then there's something to be really excited about with this Georgia offense, and I still think that's very much on the table for this group.
Yeah, it sounds like we're kind of the same mind here. John, my expectation is starting this Saturday against Kentucky, I'd be shocked if Georgia doesn't come out and play a pretty good brand of football there. I think the week off probably helps. And I still have very high expectations for the Florida game the following Saturday. Admittedly, a team like Alabama at full strength, I'm not quite sure what that matchup is, or if Georgia were to play a Clemson or Ohio State, these teams that I kind of view as the very best in college football, I think the jury'd still be out in a game like that. But the great news is you don't have to play any game like that, assuming you do get a game like that. You don't have to play it until many weeks from now. I think the next few weeks are matchups that actually favor Georgia pretty well. As I said before, including the big showdown 2 weeks from now against Florida. I think we're about to see Georgia play a pretty good brand of football over the course of the next couple of Saturdays.
Yeah, I think they have an opportunity to really throttle up. And if nothing else, the Alabama game showed that we aren't quite there yet. We're just not. We can stand toe-to-toe. We can keep the lead for 40 minutes. But there's still more that's needed and demanded when you're facing some of these more established teams like Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson. Those are upper echelon teams, which Georgia belongs in that conversation. I just, having seen what we were able to do against Alabama, I think we'll be much better prepared down the road when this offense gets a little more chemistry and gels a little bit better, and you're starting to really gear up, throttle up, and there's opportunity for that. You look at the schedule and the way it plays out, and you can't really be threatened by Kentucky, but yet you've had this off week and had this bitter taste in your mouth of going, we thought we were ready for this stage, but yet we fell short. So back to the grind, and what a great opportunity to do that, because there are some weeks ahead where you can work on what you've got going in your locker room and have to worry a little bit less about what's going on across the field front.
I want to ask you about the off week in particular here coming up in just a moment. Before that, let me remind you, it's a Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update with everybody. John Stinchcomb here, and still some time for you at Marlowe's Tavern right now to take advantage of a great cause they're supporting and also get some great benefits for yourself. No Kid Hungry is a terrific organization that really helps to serve kids who right now don't have enough food to eat. And at a time in which schools have been taken away from some kids, that's a source of nutrition for many. That means the next meal for many of the children in our state and in our communities, it may just be less certain than it's been before, and that's what No Kid Hungry wants to provide answers for, and Marlowe's Tavern wants to show support for them. So here's what you do. When you go to Marlowe's Tavern, the one in your neighborhood, whether it's a to-go order or dining in the dining room there, either way, when you make a donation to No Kid Hungry at Marlowe's, they're going to give you a coupon for $5 off a future visit. So it's really the best of both worlds. You have a chance to help Marlowe's Tavern support a great cause and No Kid Hungry, but also you get great savings on a future visit to Marlowe's Tavern, and who wouldn't enjoy that? Please go to marlowestavern.com to find out more about this. Stop by, check out the tavern in your neighborhood, as I said before. Whether you want their great to-go service and the great care they're taking to make sure that everybody's got a healthy and safe dining option there, or if you want to hang out with some friends, socially distanced and safe inside of Marlowe's Tavern dining room, either way, it's a great chance to support the No Kid Hungry cause and also enjoy some good food there with Marlowe's Tavern. All right, John, one of the things I do enjoy, and I talked about this with Terrence Edwards when he was on the show last Thursday, and I'll talk about it with you right now, is the notion of the off week itself. And I was of the belief that it kind of actually came at a pretty good time for Georgia the week after Alabama, a chance to kind of recalibrate, reboot a little bit. But specifically, logistically, how Georgia handles that. What has the last 7 days been like? Returning back to a normal game week schedule here this week, how would be the best way for Georgia to have used the time off that it had on Saturday and the little bit different kind of schedule that it was able to utilize during the off week itself? What was that like, you think?
Well, I think it's really the two primary roles that it can play is, one, you can get healthy. You don't have to play that Saturday, and you can get guys that have been dealing with some nagging issues. There is always something that's hurting at this point in the season across the board. Even if you're not showing up on the injury report, there are some aches and pains. And when you have this week, you can start addressing some of the things that you've just been tolerating for the past month and a half or so. So that's a big piece. The second is you can focus on yourself. You can focus on your team. You get this opportunity to not to prepare for your opponent, but you can do a little self-analysis as a player, as a position group, as a side of the football, special teams, offense, defense, where you go, where do we need to get better? What are the holes in our game? How do we get back to the fundamentals and address some of the issues that we've kind of tolerated and let slide at this point? It couldn't come at a better time for Georgia coming off this Alabama game, because there was so much that looks good and you feel really good about, and you still should, but it also kind of highlighted some of the flaws that exist, some of the weaknesses in the fence, so to speak, that you have some time. You've got an additional 5 practices, plus or minus, to look at yourself and say, man, this is an area of my game, of our game, that we can address and get better at, because it's going to be important when we face any opponent on any Saturday, but especially the ones that we want to compete with late in the season.
So we talked about quarterbacks when you joined us last week here for our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update, and it's become no less of a hot topic in the 7 days since then. John, as an evaluator of the game, an analyst, a former player, what would be the parameters in which you would consider a quarterback change necessary for Georgia? Whether it be Daniel's health, Bennett's performance, the younger guys who are in the mix here, what would you be looking at for you to say, you know what, maybe opening up this competition for somebody else to take some snaps on the field is the logical next step for Georgia? What would it take for you to get there?
Well, I think it matters. It's twofold, right? So you want to see the progression of the guys that the fans haven't seen on game day. So for a guy like Daniels, how's he progressing health-wise is obviously primary in his situation, but also what does he bring to the table that you think, man, we just can't play without this at this point? You look at who's a better example than Tua? Tua in college where, when does he get his opportunity? Halfway through a national championship game, and you're able to pull that trigger, and that has to solely be based on what you've seen in practice, that here's a guy that we can no longer take the field without him at the helm. And, same thing with him at the Dolphins, where Fitzpatrick, once again, has had a stellar season up to this point and is replaced, but it's got to be more with what the guy that you haven't seen has done. And if they're able to make a change and justify it, it's because at this point in the season, you can no longer justify, whether it's DeJuan Mathis and the improvement that he's possibly made or JT Daniels, anytime you're able to say, we're going to go in a different direction, it's got to be because the guy behind him is just playing and practicing at a point where you think, man, we're just so much better off with him on the field than without.
John, one of the things we love to do here on our program is kind of highlight when UGA and folks around UGA are getting involved with important causes. And you were telling me about a cool one before the show began today. It's called Trick or Treatment. It benefits the Children's Tumor Foundation. And I understand that UGA 10 is a part of this. It's kind of a fun way for folks to kind of, both engage with UGA here a little bit, but also, really support a great cause there as well. Can you fill us in on some of the details about exactly what's going on with Trick or Treatment as we head towards the Halloween season here?
Yeah, I thought this was pretty cool, and I'm glad to get to share it with you, because Children's Tumor Foundation, they're a great organization. I had a cousin who ended up passing away a few years ago, but suffered from an ailment called schwannomatosis, and basically he had tumors throughout his body, and we got to really know what the Children's Tumor Foundation does, and they're helping kids really across the world, but across our country who are struggling with these not so rare, relatively rare, but not so rare diseases where tumors are formed in their bodies and they're fighting them. So they started this fundraiser, pretty cool, pretty seasonal, in that it's Halloween, and that it's a competition where you dress your pets up, you take pictures, and they're raising money that way. And UGA, our own UGA, is participating. He's got his own page, and it's free to register your animal. But you can also vote for others. So UGA right now is barely in the top 5. So for dog fans out there, if you want to see UGA dressed up in his Halloween best, it's a good opportunity to show your support for him. But it's also a pretty cool little competition in that it's lighthearted, it's seasonal, it's connected with Halloween, and there's some pretty good-looking pets out there. And when you vote, it's just $1. And it goes to a really good cause, helping kids that are desperate for these treatments and research projects going on across this country to help them find a solution. So it's a great cause, near and dear to my heart, and a pretty fun little way to show our Georgia spirit by getting behind UGA.
So let me give the website here. I'll do it a couple of times. It's my.cupids.org/pet/UGA. If you want to find out more about this, my.cupids.org/pet/UGA. As John said, it's free to register your pet, and each vote costs $1, and that's how the money gets raised to the Children's Tumor Foundation. So really good stuff there. A chance to support a great cause, to be involved in UGA 10. We're not getting a chance to see UGA quite as much during the season. How about that? Connor Riley, very quick on That's not the easiest URL to fire off quickly, but that is there now on your screen. Very impressive all the way around from Connor Riley on that front. So we're not seeing UGA on the field as much as we want to this year, but you can see him as part of this great cause. John, also thank you for being a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. We appreciate that with you. We'll see you for DawgNation Happy Hour coming up on Thursday. Getting back on the football field against the Kentucky Wildcats. My understanding is it may be cold in Lexington on Saturday, so maybe on Thursday we'll talk about how a cold weather game impacts the Dogs a little bit, if that is indeed the forecast on tap for Lexington this weekend.
Well, I look forward to it. It's I just am so thankful that we have a season to talk about. We're playing football, and in these crazy times, it's nice to have some normalcy where we're getting to watch our Dogs take the field.
I think that's exactly right, John. We'll see you Thursday.
Can't wait. Go Dogs.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, great stuff from John Stinchcomb there as part of a Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. Let me transition now to our SEC Through, and we are jammed on our SEC Through today, so I want to try to get into as much of this as I can. The Auburn-Ole Miss game on Saturday was controversial because of what looked like should have been potentially an Ole Miss touchdown on what appeared to be an Auburn player touching a kickoff. Certainly the ball seemed to be redirected after coming near contact with his hand. The SEC, though, the officials on hand said they reviewed it in the moment, did not see evidence to say that the ball had been touched, and did not do a longer review to really try to evaluate if this should have been a fumble recovery in the end zone for a touchdown. Auburn wins again on what appears to be another controversial call after the pretty cut and dry controversy of the Arkansas game, in which Auburn probably was lucky not to have that call go against them. There was a little bit of rumblings after the Kentucky game there as well. So it sort of seems like Auburn has greatly benefited from some officiating stuff here thus far this year. My take on this is going to be a little bit different, though, in that in this particular instance, I think we all have to assume there is now an unwritten rule that on anything involving a kickoff, the unwritten rule is when they can call a touchback, they're going to. I think the one thing that the rules folks want to try to keep out of the game as much as possible is anything that looks like a scrum down near the goal line or anything like a kickoff. I mean, some people have openly wondered if in a couple of years we don't even have kickoffs in football anymore. So the idea that they're looking to keep a live ball and a kickoff going any longer than they have to, unless it is obvious that the ball had been touched, for the most part, that's just kind of an unwritten rule that we have to live with. Now, more than anything, even though in this particular instance I'm actually not that surprised they didn't stop and change this rule, I think it speaks to a real issue the SEC has. I'm going to come across as kind of a philosophical blowhard here, and I don't mean to, but we are just going to time right now where there's a lot of distrust of institutions, and I'm not going to cite any of those specific institutions because it has a tendency to feel a little too political, but you know what I'm talking about on a number of different fronts here. And I think the SEC is no different. When a call like this happens, there's this assumption, well, this is the SEC supporting what is kind of viewed as one of the have programs, Auburn, in comparison to what is kind of viewed as one of the have-not programs, Ole Miss. I don't believe that's true, but I do think it's interesting how quickly people go to not just officiating lack of competency, but some sort of officiating conspiracy. We just seem to get there pretty quick. And the SEC, when it comes to stuff like this, does itself no favors. Not because they made the wrong call on Saturday. I'm not quite so sure they did. I actually don't want a whole bunch of game stop for long replays on something that watching the video over and over again doesn't make quite as definitive as the call on the field would be. It's not like things got way better because of slowing it down, watching it over and over again. Many of us have now seen it many times. But the SEC is just so bad at talking about some of this kind of stuff. You know, a couple of years ago, they started their @SEC officiating Twitter account, but they never use it. I mean, if you go and look at it on a typical Saturday, they never tweet from this account at all. This was supposed to be the way that the SEC communicated with its fans about the officiating decisions, but frankly, I don't think the SEC knows how to talk about this stuff. Go back and think about that Auburn-Arkansas game the other day. It was clearly a bad call, but if anything, the SEC's explanation of that bad call made things worse. This call's not quite so bad, but the SEC's inability to discuss this kind of stuff as a human being would, I think just creates the idea that Ole Miss fans, folks like that, feel like the league is out to get them. By the way, these are just the kinds of games that Ole Miss loses, and for better or worse, the kinds of game that Auburn finds a way to win. I think it's interesting that, Lane Kiffin has drawn almost universal praise thus far this season. Gus Malzahn and Auburn have drawn almost universal chagrin, if that's the word I'm looking for here. Yet it was always sort of obvious that this would be a win that Auburn would find a way to get, and Ole Miss would find a way to lose. We talked about the Alabama-Tennessee game off the top of the program. The big story there, the Jaylen Waddle injury. The other thing here is some heat on Tennessee after getting blown out in the game, and people are citing how many times it is thus far in the Jeremy Pruitt era. They've absolutely just been walloped, and this game, another example of that. Pruitt had some unfortunate comments after the game where he talked about the gap closing, even though the final score doesn't appear to be the case. I don't think that's true. I think, if anything, Jeremy and Pruitt inherited an awful, awful situation. And there's going to be some national media types, and you know who these people are, who are now going to try to say, well, gosh, look at Greg Schiano. He just got a win against Michigan State week 1 for Rutgers. What's Jeremy Pruitt doing at Tennessee? That's a false comparison. Michigan State's also in a pretty dreadful way right now. Mel Tucker has inherited a mess there in East Lansing. So, listen, it's not my job to defend Jeremy Pruitt. I'm sure there's some Tennessee podcasts that want to do that. But, this idea that Tennessee's in an awful position because they got blown out by Alabama. There are a lot of people getting blown out by the Crimson Tide right now. A couple other stories to get to here real quickly. LSU South Carolina was a very interesting game. First of all, TJ Finley comes in off the bench for South Carolina. What a revelation he was. He is throwing the ball all over the yard. What's amazing about this is that, I've been of the belief that, hey, if you're going to play well as a true freshman in this league right now, you better be a super uber elite prospect. That is not what TJ Finley was. He's only a 3-star. He's barely in the top 500, and yet as a prospect, and yet he was very impressive for LSU on Saturday. Ed Orgeron a couple of times has reaffirmed his support for Miles Brennan as still the starting quarterback for LSU. I think that's interesting. This may be a little bit of a quarterback controversy in LSU between a guy in Finley who came in, played well, a guy in Brennan who's been there for a long time. Family has deep ties to the state of Louisiana. This may get juicy in LSU right now with maybe a little bit of a quarterback controversy. Also, the other thing about the LSU game was not just to play a Finley at quarterback. How about B.J. Ocholari was flying around the ball on Saturday? What a good game from him. I was really happy to see that. And then finally there's this. Kentucky, nothing offensively against Missouri. We said all last week that you got to be careful going on the road to Missouri right there. And for Kentucky, they didn't heed our warnings, and it obviously did not work out well for them. A little bit of a mess there for the for the Wildcats. I'm sure they'll play better at home, and the SEC teams have a tendency to do that, bouncing back after a road game. But a little bit of a tough situation there for the Wildcats on that front. Georgia's opponent for this week did not look good against Missouri on Saturday. Let me also squeeze this in here very quickly. A little bit of recruiting news I want to get to. On the one hand, Alabama gets a big win. Quincy McKinstry, that's a hard name for me to say, and I've always has been. Big 5-star defensive back prospect. He commits to Alabama over the weekend, so Alabama gets a big recruiting win there. Also, Xavier Sorey, the linebacker prospect, on his Instagram story, Sorey on his story, if you're following me on that, he took a visit to Florida this past weekend. No game there in Gainesville, and I guess the football program technically was still under lockdown because of coronavirus, but Story on his own dime does travel to Gainesville, so that's one to pay attention to, and we'll make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, I joked about this a moment ago, but I don't think a lot of us realize maybe just how precarious a situation we were in the SEC on the heels of Florida missing its last 2 games, having to shut down its program because of coronavirus. That the Gators are supposed to get back to practice today ahead of their game with Missouri this Saturday, and it's believed that they're going to. Scott Strickland was on the Paul Feinbaum show on Friday saying that they're expected to have 5 or fewer players in quarantine when practice begins back today. But imagine this for a moment. What if the practice didn't begin? Like, well, what? And as it stands now, they still haven't had it. But what if they didn't have that practice? The house of cards that kind of holds all this SEC schedule together, that would have gotten tricky there at that point. Now, to my understanding, no one's gotten sick at Florida, so I'm not panic peddling on this. I'm just saying that the logistics of trying to have the schedule made more difficult if Florida's return to practice ahead of this Missouri game, which the whole thing has been reconfigured to make all this make sense. Florida getting back at it today is crucial for the rest of the SEC season kind of stay on track the way it's supposed to, including the big showdown for the cocktail party coming up a couple Saturdays from now. Florida Athletic Director Scott Strickland, before going on the Five Bomb Show, also released a statement to some of his stakeholders there with the Florida program. This is what Strickland said about the current state with the Gators.
I'd like to provide you with an update regarding the Gator football team and the recent COVID cases within the program. Following our last road trip, we have evaluated all phases of team travel to better understand how we can enhance the safety and health protocols. Now, it's believed that a couple of individuals who just a day before the trip had tested negative for COVID through the SEC testing protocol developed mild symptoms that they attributed to allergies or the common cold, and then boarded the team plane on that Friday. Those same individuals subsequently tested positive for COVID on Sunday of that week. Of course, our staff immediately began testing daily, and as more positive cases developed, all team activities were paused effective October 13th. Now, all staff and players on the Texas A&M trip were instructed to quarantine and participate in daily testing through October 26th, and that continues.
Look, I really don't know what's gone on there at Florida. I think the whole thing's been a mess. It certainly speaks to poor leadership, the fact they've had so many people test positive during the season. There's also been some rumors about, how some of that may have gone down there, but one way or another, if they can just get it under control, get back on the practice field, the schedule still remains intact. And more interestingly, we'll see what Florida looks like when they start playing again. Has anything about this porous defense been kind of cleaned up? Or is this still the same version of Florida we saw prior to their 2-week layoff? Obviously, a lot of eyes will be on that game on Saturday. Let me do a few national things here as we wrap up, too. It's a busy weekend in college football. I want to make sure we kind of touch on some of this kind of stuff. I think Notre Dame is becoming a somewhat interesting story. They blew out Pitt on Saturday. We've talked about, who gets 2 playoff teams in. Is it SEC? Is it Big Ten? Notre Dame, who I don't think is a great team, but are beaten up on a soft ACC schedule right now, finding Irish remain a team worth watching here a little bit, because obviously the playoff committee would love nothing more than to have them in the mix. By the way, thank you to all of you who did point out after Friday's show me laughing at the notion that Penn State was a playoff contender. Penn State summarily goes out and gets beat by Indiana this past weekend. For those of you who noticed that and gave us a little credit for that, we certainly appreciate that. Another Big Ten story to pay attention to here is Graham Mertz, the Wisconsin quarterback, fresh off a big performance on Friday, has tested positive for the coronavirus. Those antigen tests the Big Ten's taking, going to be a lot of false positives there. We'll see what happens with that. Also, Gator Hater Updater. Let's give that to you on the way out the door here. What's the number? 1,458 days. We'll see you tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door. And on video. Boy, a lot of stuff from a busy weekend in college football. We try to cram it all in. Let me shout out to my friends at RS Andrews, then we'll dive into the comments. We probably will not go quite as long on comments as we did last week. Last week was kind of a vent session. We're ready to kind of turn the page here, a la Bob Seger right now. So I don't know that we'll be venting quite as much today. But I do want to revisit what we said on Friday, though, because I've heard from even more of you since then. People seem to like the agreement that we made on Friday. So I want to revisit this here in a moment. But first, RS Andrews, air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. You can trust them to take care of you. Find them online at rsandrews.com. Story after story, they will deliver a smile. So if you've got an air conditioning issue, this weekend you probably ran yours. Heating system issue. We know the winter's on its way, so you'll be turning that heat on it here pretty soon. Water heater goes out. They can, in many cases, replace it for you the same day. Just got to find them online at rsandrews.com. All right, let's revisit this from Friday. So what we said was, just to kind of revisit all this, I think most of us agree that the Georgia offense is not as good right now as it needs to be. And I think the leftover conversation on this, well, what do you do in response to that? And some of you have said, hey, you got to make a quarterback change at all costs. You got to just do whatever you do. Put JT Daniels in, put Dwan Mathis back in, whatever else. And what I've said is I'm open to that. There's a possibility that could be required, but I have been willing, and I think correctly so, give Stetson Bennett some more credit than some of y'all have. And so we've been kind of at loggerheads on that. And so what we agreed to on Friday was this, that if Stetson Bennett falls below the statistical threshold that I'm about to read to you, then I will open up the door for revisiting Dwan Mathis or, rushing JT Daniels out on the football field, whatever. But I said in response, if Stetson Bennett has this game, then some of y'all got to start giving him some credit. And so here's where we are. 3 touchdowns accounted for. Through the air, on the ground, from Stetson, 3 touchdowns accounted for. He must average 9 yards per attempt on his passes. And by the way, that is a very good statistical feat, okay? That'd put him like at the top 15 in the country if he could do that for an entire year. But I'm trying to be the one that's on the generous side of this. 9 yards per attempt. 0 interceptions, and here's the big one. 0 batted passes. That if Stetson Bennett does that on Saturday against Kentucky, 3 touchdowns, 9 yards per attempt, no picks, no batted passes, then Stetson Bennett has to be given credit for doing with the Georgia offense what needs to be done for now. And if he does less than that, if he has fewer than 3 touchdowns accounted for, fewer than 9 yards per attempt, if he gets a ball picked off, if he has a ball batted down the line of scrimmage, then on this show, henceforth, especially during the comment section, I will be open to whatever quarterback change you guys want to talk about. That's the agreement we made on Friday. I've heard from more of you since then. People seem to like that, and it is on that which we will begin our conversation today. Are we even on Facebook at all right now? We're not on Facebook at all right now? All right, we are on Facebook. We got a few people over here. All right. So I'll take some Facebook comments, and since they've had a rough day, I'll begin with them, then we'll go to YouTube after that. And somebody put the YouTube in there, so I appreciate that. Wendell Brewer says the quarterback makes the team. Bottom line, yeah, Wendell, there's no doubt it's the most important position on the field, and it's an easy explanation for why Georgia's fans have been as interested in that topic as they have been as of late. Kenyon White says, we're trying to justify Bennett starting. I'm embarrassed. But you got to make the agreement now. You got to do it now. Because I don't want to hear it after this week if he plays well. And look, no one's going to deny that Georgia's not where some of these other teams are offensively. No one's going to deny that. But the question is, what do you do about that during the season? Philip Jordan Wells is laughing. I just want to make sure we're on the same page. PJW. David Harvey wants wholesale destruction of the Wildcat. So he's fired up for the game. I was thinking about this before the show started today. The 2018 Georgia-Kentucky game was quite a performance for UGA. Hugh Nash is back on Facebook. He says he feels dirty for having to go on YouTube. Yeah, like, honestly, there's nothing more frustrating to me when these platforms don't cooperate. I shouldn't even joke this way because somebody are going to take the wrong way. When you start thinking about hauling big tech in front of Congress, this is what I want them to have to answer for. I want them to have to answer for why the video platform can't work consistently every single day. That's what I want them hauled in front of Congress about. But we are lucky we have multiple platforms to put the show on, though. I will say that. BJ Wise and Justin Fields. Yeah, Fields is good, man. Fields is good. Stephen England says, can you please tell us how to vote for the Ultimate Fan? So the way this goes down is if you go to the DawgNation.com, at the tab up there at the top, you can see all about this. And on our DawgNation social page, we have all of the submissions on there. And so when you put your submission out on your social media, that's how folks have a chance to vote for that. I'll make sure we get more clarity about this, but that's the basic gist of it is when you put your submission out there, that's how folks have a chance to vote for you. And I probably need to do more to explain that, but I'll work to be able to do that. Barry Watkins says Notre Dame will get throttled by Clemson. Here's the thing, and I think you're probably right about that, but getting throttled by Clemson I don't think is going to be enough to disqualify them from playoff talk because the playoff committee would like the idea of Notre Dame being a part of this. Now, I'll admit something to you. I actually have no idea how the ACC is going to determine its conference championship teams this year. They're not doing divisions. So, like, in comparison to North Carolina and Clemson, North Carolina has a conference loss to Florida State. And, North Carolina wallop NC State on Saturday. Notre Dame will eventually have one to Clemson because they are playing the regular season. Like, how would they determine who makes the ACC title game between a potential one-loss UNC and a potential one-loss Notre Dame if we're assuming that Clemson's undefeated? I have no idea. Some of y'all may know. But I'm not even sure 2 losses to Clemson would totally disqualify from the Irish from playoff talk there. Oh, let's get a few more. John William Adams says the Missouri-Florida game's now interesting. I think it is now interesting because, listen, publicly, everything that Florida has been talking about for the last couple of weeks is about getting, the coronavirus out of the program and all that kind of stuff. And that's obviously serious, but to my knowledge, so far, no one's gotten sick, truly sick, around the Florida program. So we're assuming for now that they may have tested positive for the virus, but they've been plenty healthy. That's our assumption, other than some cold-like symptoms, which was kind of a precursor to the game against Texas A&M. So if we assume that everyone's been, for the most part, kind of fine without getting too sick, that privately the discussions have not been about the virus. Privately the discussions have been about the defense and how to make that better. And how much better can you get when you're not practicing? I honestly don't know the answer to that. But at the very least, if you're going to have a lockdown, shutdown coming on the heels of a bad game after, 3 consecutive weeks of bad defense, probably wasn't the worst time to kind of try to reboot the program a little bit. So privately, there's been a lot of on-field talk about Florida, I'm sure, behind the scenes in that program. And this is a Missouri team that can throw it a little bit. Drinkwitz has had a good year. And listen, I was big on Sam Pittman before the start of the season. I have heaped praise on him during the season. The truth is Eli Drinkwitz is coming around the bend here and making the race for SEC Coach of the Year a little closer than maybe it would have seemed at one point in time. There have been a lot of upset wins for Drinkwitz. 2-touchdown dog to LSU, won the game outright. Nearly a touchdown dog to Kentucky, won the game outright. Now, at some point in time, they got to go on the road. I do realize that. The last 2 Missouri games have been weird schedule deals. With the LSU game moving last minute, the Kentucky game being scheduled last minute. But, listen, Drinkwitz has handled this pretty well. And that Connor dude that starts at quarterback one's pretty good. What's the last name? Bizalak or something like that? He's a pretty good little thrower. Buck Brinson bets me 5 cents that JT plays on Saturday. We're not governed by FCC regulations here on streaming video, but if we were, I'd be prohibited from making any kind of bet on air. So in the spirit of that rule, I'll refrain from making a bet. But if I were to put a nickel on the line, I guess I would bet against it. And in a way, I guess I hope I'm wrong because I'd love to see Daniels healthy enough to play. But that seems like too nice and tidy of a storyline for me he was too hurt to play prior to this, but after 2 weeks, all of a sudden, magically, he's healthy enough to go. That seems a little too buttoned up, a little too tidy for me. So in the spirit of Coastal Elite broadcast decorum, I will refrain from making a bet. But if I were to, in the role of a citizen, I probably would bet against that. I'm going to go to YouTube here in a minute. Good comment so far. David Harvey, funny comment. Let me see what else is going on over here. Let's get some YouTube comment. Hope everybody had a great weekend. I did. Watch a lot of football on Saturday. It's always really nice. Just a good way, just kind of a good thing all the way around. Bank 6 says, how about the irony that if Georgia plays Bama, they'll have no Jaylen Waddle, but Georgia might have Arian Smith, who's kind of the hope for a lot of Georgia fans to be Georgia's version of Jaylen Waddle. That is kind of interesting. And listen, I'll repeat this for the 9 millionth time. I love Waddle. I would never want Waddle to be hurt. But if he is hurt, if that's just a fact to be dealt with, then it potentially works to Georgia's advantage. It is unfortunately true. James Wade says, and he's an LSU fan, he says, TJ Finley or Miles Brennan, give me Finley. Yeah, I'm imagining most LSU fans feel that way right now, James. And I think this is an interesting test for Ed Orgeron. That Orgeron's the coach of the defending national champion. Is he popular enough as a coach to make a decision that most LSU fans, if I had to guess, probably don't agree with? And the fact that, Brennan's kind of somewhat connected family maybe makes this even more interesting. But, Orgeron has kind of said a couple of times, he was interviewed on the SEC Network this morning right before I drove into work, saying that, Miles Brennan's our quarterback right now. when you win a national championship, you earn yourself a little bit of a longer leash with fans, at least for a little while. But I would say that most fans probably don't love the idea of Finley over Brennan in a year in which it's kind of all a wash anyway. It's just amazing to me that, as I said before, this kid was like the 500th rated prospect in the country. This is not like some big time prospect. He's not even the top 20, I don't think, of Louisiana prospects. And he just looked so good in that game on Saturday. It's very interesting. Chili Vic says Brennan's still hurt, so Finley will start next week, and maybe another performance like that kind of ends the discussion. It'll just be Finley the rest of the way. But also don't discount what P.J. Ojulari did last Saturday as well. Look, this is going to sound like Monday morning quarterbacking, but I kind of said this at the time. It's like, hey, Azeez Ojulari is very good. If I had a chance to get B.J. Ojulari too, I probably just would have taken him. It just seems like the apple probably doesn't fall that far from the tree. And sure enough, Ojulari, the other, is playing really good too. I'm not saying Georgia, missed on him. That's not what I'm saying. But I kind of thought he was probably a pretty good player at the time. Louis McElroy says, our version of TJ Finley's on the bench. I knew that was coming. I will admit that one of the things I've been kind of hinting at lately is guys like Mathis and Beck are not the level of prospect that you should assume are going to step on the field and have immediate success. I try not to say that too overtly, but I have been hinting at that. Hey, listen, when you have a guy that plays right away and plays well, you should assume that's a Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields level prospect more so than someone who's, rated a good bit lower. With Finley doing what he did on Saturday, there's obviously a chance that I'm just wrong about that. I'm not too big of a man to admit, or, too proud to admit that. All right, what time is it? All right, we got a couple more minutes. Ray Johnson says UGA is too sorry of an offense to win a championship. We'll see. Michael Porter says, who's my pick to start at quarterback on Saturday? It is Bennett, if I had to assume. I think that Bennett's the quarterback that still plays, I reckon, every snap. And then, we've kind of, I do this half serious, half kidding. We've kind of put together a statistical benchmark for what Bennett might need to do to earn the trust to also be the guy against Florida. Because, listen, I keep repeating this over and over. The East is not a hollow goal, especially with Alabama now less of a team than they were before Saturday because of the Waddle injury. That, beating Florida still matters to me. Winning the East still matters. I'm not saying it's in replace of winning a national championship. Obviously, winning a national championship is the thing you want to do. But for the next 2 weeks, you can't win a national championship, but you can take huge steps towards winning the East. And so if Bennett plays well on Saturday against Kentucky, then that's the guy that I would want to play against Florida. And I say that as someone who really wants Florida to win that. Who really wants Georgia to win that game. But obviously, if Bennett, after having 2 more weeks to do whatever, if he, has batted passes, if he's, not connecting and not moving the offense the way that is needed to be done, then at that point in time, you got to be open to anything for the Florida game, because that is a game you have to win. Johnny Lester says if Fields was still on Georgia's roster, we'd be undefeated number 1 in the nation. I just don't see any reason why that wouldn't be true or how it couldn't be true. It's hard to even think about how good Georgia would be, have the potential to be anyway, if Justin Fields was a quarterback. Scott Harris says, any comment on the Penn State loss? The Big Ten still getting 2 teams in. Yeah, thank you, Scott, for bringing that up. We mentioned this at the very end of our regular broadcast. It's just silly. It was silly on Friday when we started the show by pointing this out, and it's silly now that, Penn State was minus its best player already, Mike Parsons. And, James Franklin, for all the love, boy, short list of evidence. A lot of love, a little bit of evidence. And we seem to see this kind of stuff, show up from time to time. But I'm a big believer in what the Bear, Chris Felica, says, that when you lose, say nothing. When you win, say less. So I'm not going to take too much of a victory lap on that. But for those of you that did point out that we started the show on Friday by laughing at Penn State, then Penn State went out and lost to Indiana that next day. For those of you that noticed, I certainly appreciate that. Frank Patterson says on the subject of Justin Fields about the notion of learning a pro-style offense, I really can't go down this road. I can't go down this road. But here's the one thing I think everybody needs to understand about pro-style offense. NFL teams will be begging Ryan Day to be their head coach, begging him to be their head coach. So that is the definition of a pro-style offense, is the fact that they're going to want Day to run his offense in the pros. So, I mean, if it hasn't already happened, it's going to happen. He's going to get all kinds of, NFL chatter. I don't know that he wants to leave Penn State. I have no idea. But there will be teams. I'd love it to be the Falcons. Can you imagine the Falcons draft Fields, hire Ryan Day? I'd be thrilled at that notion. But the idea that, but anything related to sort of pro-style offense, Ryan Day is a coach who is being sought after to coach in the pros. That is a pro-style offense. All right. John Adams says, if you lose the East, we are in reverse. And I believe that's true. You cannot regress the season. Good enough to win the national championship, we'll find that out. But you need to gain every goal along the way towards that. Beating Florida, winning the SEC East are certainly examples of those goals. Jay Johnson, looking forward to that rematch. Hopefully we'll get a chance to see that. Morris Farmer says, keep being satisfied with only winning the East and nothing more. I don't know that anyone is satisfied with only that, but, in most cases, winning the East is a precursor to anything that happens after that. Kenyon White says, finally you admit it when it comes to Fields. The truth is, I've been pretty candid about this Fields thing for a good while. Some of y'all haven't given me enough credit for that, but I've been pretty candid about this for a while. James Crump says Florida's going to lose to Missouri. Maybe a little too much for Missouri right there. Barry Watkins giving me a loud boo. A loud boo. Oh, maybe is that about the Falcons hiring Ryan Day? Maybe he doesn't want to do that. Listen, at this point in time, I believe the Falcons take about anybody. All right. Anything else? All right, we got to go. Good stuff all the way around. Thank you for your comments. By the way, make sure you check out the AJC for your Atlanta news now. I joked about this on Twitter yesterday. So I'm gone for most of the day on Sunday. I have to coach my kids' soccer teams. Then I get back on Twitter. You're scrolling through your timeline. You can tell that people are mad, but it's hard to figure out what the Falcons did to lose a game, whether it be the onside kick thing or the thing yesterday with the Lions. It's just like, it's almost like a contest of who can decide what happened in the game based on the cryptic, incomplete tweets that you're getting from people about the situation. But if you want to read all about the aftermath of the Falcons' loss to the Lions, AJC.com. Great to do that for your Atlanta news now. Also, we're entering into, and listen, we don't talk politics in the show, but for those of you who follow it, really an unprecedented election in Georgia. To have two Senate elections going on at the same time is unique, and obviously a presidential election that's getting a little bit of attention too. So if you want to follow how it's all going on in our state, how it's about to go down, and who's got the edge, and what's gonna happen, we'll never talk about it on this show. I can promise you that. But the AJC is all over it. Atlanta News Now at AJC.com. Make sure you check that out. All right. R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Big thanks to them for making all of this possible here today. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric, story after story. They have been delivering smiles. They can deliver a smile for you because they show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. Check them out online at rsandrews.com. All right. We'll be back tomorrow, 10 a.m. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to speaking to you then, everybody. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.